Good evening. If you are looking for the track Scat and all that program, you found the right place. Jenny and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Ranger Elena. I work at the Refuge and I will be tonight's moderator. We are going to start off with some housekeeping. So I will share my screen again. So just some reminders. This program, like all of our other programs run through Facebook Live, will be recorded and it will be available to watch on under the videos tab on the Friends Facebook page. And then Jenny and I want to remind you that we love questions throughout the program. So anything that comes to mind, just pop it in the comments. It gives us a chance to kind of tailor the program to your interests. As questions come, some of them might get answered throughout the presentation. Otherwise, we'll have a dedicated question and answer period at the end of the program. So now I am going to turn it over to Jenny, who is the Friends Contract Naturalist. She's going to fill you in about the signs animals leave behind in winter. So off to you, Jenny.
All right, thanks so much, Ranger Elena. I certainly appreciate it. I hope everybody is ready to grab their magnifying glasses and become nature detectives. So for the next 40 minutes, we will be talking a lot about signs that animals leave when we don't actually see the animal. Because oftentimes when we are hiking around, the animals hear us and they tend to run away. So we can see some of the signs they leave behind. And some of those signs include tracks, scat. We might see some animal homes, maybe some food left behind. Even sounds sometimes that animals make, although I wouldn't say they necessarily leave those behind. You might be able to see the animal if they make some sounds. So our role as being a nature detective is to find these clues out in nature and piece them together to figure out what animal might have left the clues and maybe what that animal had been up to before we walked through on the trails. So the first clues we will talk about are tracks. And tracks, I'm sure most of you know, is just a fancy word for animal footprints. These can often tell you, obviously, what animal had the tracks. Most animals have pretty unique tracks, so you can usually identify pretty close to what animal left those tracks. They can give you the direction the animal was traveling, maybe how fast it was going, and sometimes you can even tell when they came through, give a day or two or so, and you might be able to know how many days ago they went through. So before we get into too much with tracks, I want to go over some track vocabulary with you because when you go out and look at these tracks, maybe you'll bring a book or something with you. And you will see a lot of terms. I am just going to go over a few of those terms with you here. So the first couple terms are probably ones that you are familiar with. If you look at that dog track on the left there, you will notice a couple lines there. These are representing length and width. So length is obviously, it'd be from the tip of the toes or the claws, if you see any claws, to the back of the heel or the back of the toes, depending on the animal you're looking at. And the width is just the furthest left on the print to the furthest right on the print, or right to left, depending on how you want to measure it. And those are pretty easy ones to do. There are ranges of lengths and widths for species. Some of them overlap, some of them do not. So it kind of just depends on what you have there. Oftentimes the term register is used. Register is just another word for like a single print that the animal leaves. And you can have kind of a couple different kinds. Direct register would kind of look like where the blue circle is there on the right. Hopefully you can see that. That means that it's either a single track, or if you say direct register, that means that the animal's front print went down first and then the back print set right on top of it, and it almost looks exactly like one print. It's hard to tell. Well, you can also get the other way, which is double register, where the back print actually just overlaps the front print, either a little far forward or a little far back, kind of like the red circle there on these deer tracks. Gait refers to how fast the animal is moving. So animals can walk, they can run, some of them bound, there's galloping. So these animals use a lot of different speeds depending on what they are doing on any given day. And the last two terms you might hear are straddle and stride. Now straddle kind of refers to the width of the track or the trail, which includes all of the prints you can see along a trail. So it's basically like the track to the furthest right on the trail to the track to the furthest left on the trail. And stride is kind of like the length of their walk or their run or something like that. And they usually measure that with using the center of one print, either going up or back to the center of the prints or the print groups right in front of it. So those are kind of the vocabulary. The next thing we'll talk a little bit about quick are tips for tracking. There are kind of some nice tips that are good to keep in mind when you are looking at tracks. They can be kind of hard to identify, so oftentimes these tips might help you out. The biggest one is probably take advantage of clear tracks. If you get a really nice clear track of an animal, regardless of species, take a really good look at it. Because that can help you if you end up finding tracks that maybe didn't register very well in whatever medium you are looking at on the ground. So those clear tracks can really help you out. And when you're looking at tracks, obviously, like the vocabulary pointed out, you want to look at the length, the width, the stride, the straddle, that kind of thing. Also, the pattern in the gait can be very helpful because some animals typically move slower or typically move faster than others. Count the number of toes. The spacing between the toes can also be helpful. Look for the presence of claws or not. That can be really helpful too. Sometimes these prints, the actual like toe pads and stuff, can be obscured by fur. Being that it's winter, animals tend to have heavier fur coats or even feathered feet. So sometimes those tracks can be a little obscured. So pay attention to that if you see it. Look at both the fore and the hind prints. Some animals have pretty much identical fore and hind prints, like deer, but other animals, such as raccoons, kind of have different looking back feet than they do front feet. If you're not sure what you were looking at, follow the track for as long as you can. You might find clearer prints that'll help you identify it. You might find other signs that accompany these tracks that will help you ID what animal you are looking at. Knowing the habitat or the location you are in can help, because then you can kind of rule out some animals. If you're in the middle of an upland prairie, odds are the tracks you're looking at aren't otter tracks, because they tend to hang out near water, especially in the winter. And if you are going to take photos, make sure you put something in your photo for scale, whether that's a ruler or if you've got like a hat or a glove that you kind of know the length of. That can be really helpful for you if you're looking at them later. And the best spots on the ground to find tracks are in wet, shallow snow. So if the snow has melted a little bit, that kind of gives a chance for the prints to sink into the snow and be very clear. Wet mud, like near riverbanks and stuff, can be really nice. And wet sand as well. If you find some wet sand beaches, you might find some really good tracks there. And if you're looking for a good time to look for tracks, a really good time would be if you had maybe a snowfall in the afternoon going out the next morning, because then you get the animals the chance to walk over the fresh snow before you walk, so you can actually see their tracks instead of them getting covered up by another snowfall. And as far as aids go, I know I mentioned books. I have 2 animal track books. Mike, oh, you can't see these ones. That's okay. Elena may put these in the comments. Animal Tracks of Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's a lone pine field guide. I like this one. It shows each animal on each page. So each species is on a separate page and has their tracks on there. I also have the Midwest Quick Guide Animal Tracks. This one I actually bring with me out in the field. It's much smaller, more handheld. And they have similar animals on one page. So you can kind of compare and contrast the different tracks while you're looking at the ones that you found on the ground. So now that we know a little bit of track lingo and a little bit of the tips, we will get into some of the animals you might actually find out on the refuge or around in this area during the winter time. So canines, we're talking about dogs here. Often on the refuge, you're going to maybe see coyotes, red fox or gray fox. I did put a print of a wolf on here just so you can see comparison, but it's very rare to see a wolf in this area. You might have to go maybe a little farther north in Minnesota to see those. And we'll also talk a little bit about domestic dogs because their prints look very similar too. So all canine tracks have 4 toes on each paw, and they have usually a pretty defined heel. And then they have claws on the tops. Sometimes these can be obscured depending on how fast the animal's running. If you look at the coyote track kind of in the middle, you notice that there aren't any claw marks on the outer parts. Sometimes those claw marks just don't show up very well when they imprint on the ground. And one cool thing that might be helpful if you're wondering if is it a canine print, is it a cat print, I'm not sure. If you draw an X between the toe pads, oftentimes in canines you will not touch the heel pad imprint. Sometimes you do, oftentimes you don't, and that can be a good indicator. If it does that, then you know it's probably a canine print. So I know oftentimes, we're walking on a trail. We see a canine track, we're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what it is. Could it be a coyote? Maybe it's a wolf. We're not sure. It could actually be someone's pet dog that they brought with them to enjoy the trails with. And one way that I kind of look to see, is it a pet or is it a wild dog? It's kind of how the tracks move. So usually like coyotes and fox, wolves too, they have places to go and things to do. So they walk kind of in a straight line. They might curve a little bit, but it's a relatively straight line because they know where they're going and they want to get there. Our pets, of course, our dogs love to smell everything. It's kind of a fun trait of theirs. So those tracks will kind of meander all over the place. They might go to a bush, stop at, a spot on the ground, that kind of thing. And there's often human footprints along with those that can indicate maybe it's a pet rather than just a really, really, really big track that you think might be a wolf. It could be a wolf if you're further up north. And dogs often move, so they kind of do the double register, or I'm sorry, the direct register, where it looks just like one print kind of trotting along as they go. They can run or walk. Usually when I see canine prints, they are trotting. It seems to be their most preferred method of movement. So compared to canines, we are going to pop over to the felines. And here in Minnesota, if you run into a wildcat print, it is going to be a bobcat print. You may occasionally find like a house cat or a feral cat print. They're about half the size of feline prints. So feline prints can be about maybe 2.5 inches long. House cats are going to be maybe half that or even smaller depending on the size of the cat. And these guys also have 4 toes on each paw. And if you notice, if you try to draw an X between the toes of this bobcat track here, you definitely hit the heel pad on there. So if you do that and you see no claws, it is probably some sort of a feline, maybe a bobcat. You may have to follow these tracks for a little bit. I know the other day I was walking a trail, thought I was seeing bobcat prints, but a little further up I could see claw prints, so then I knew it was probably somebody's pet dog. And they also kind of do the same gaits, similar gaits to dogs. So they kind of do that direct register where it looks like just one print at a time moving along. I did put a running gait in here too, so you could kind of get an idea of maybe what that might look like if a bobcat ends up running away from you at some time, which would be really cool. So from canines and felines, we are going to move into some prey animals, rodents. I know a lot of people don't like rodents, especially small mammals. They happen to be one of my favorites. So to each their own, I suppose, right? So you notice I have kind of 2 track patterns here on this one. I kind of have that 4-track pattern, and that is used mostly by smaller mammals. So we're talking mice, voles, and then on up to like red and gray squirrels. They use kind of that 4-track bounding movement. The larger rodents tend to have a harder time moving around. So they kind of do this 2-track double register type look, oftentimes with the tail drag mark. So here you're looking at, those are beaver tracks, but you can also get muskrats, also are kind of larger rodents that move similarly to beavers. The hind print is usually larger than the foreprint in rodents. It can be a little harder to tell when you come down to like mice and voles, just because their tracks are so small anyways. And they all have claws. Sometimes those claws will show up in the snow, sometimes they won't. It depends on the type of snow. And obviously some of them have webbing on their toes. Beavers spend most of their time in water, so it's really helpful for them to have webbing on their toes. And the size ranges depending on the animal you're looking at. Small mammals such as mice might be no more than 1/4 inch long for each track. Beavers, their back track can get on up to 7 inches long. So it varies quite a bit when you're looking at rodents in general. Our next animal is also a prey animal. Rabbits are super cool. We know they oftentimes bound. They like to jump. They have those really large back feet that help propel them. And they also leave a 4-track pattern, but it's not quite the same as rodents. If you kind of draw lines around all of the prints, it kind of almost makes a triangle. So like the two, and you'll notice this animal is actually moving from left to right. A lot of animals, when they're moving fast, their back prints actually are in front of their front prints when they're moving. It's just kind of how they carry themselves, so they can get the most power out of their back legs. But the 2 front feet, which happen to be behind the back feet in this one, are kind of like a little offset from each other. Usually the back prints are right next to each other when they're hopping. And they can have huge spaces between these 4-track groups. I've seen some that are like 5-6 feet apart, and that I know is definitely a rabbit. Sometimes squirrels can be mistaken for rabbit tracks, but they can't jump nearly as far as rabbits can. Rabbits will oftentimes have fur all over their feet, so it's very hard to see the individual pads. And you'll notice kind of this real picture of the rabbit tracks. It is kind of hard to tell where each toe is, and some even where the claws are, especially in the front feet. If you're looking for rabbits on the refuge, I actually have rarely seen rabbits on the refuge. I know they're there because I've seen some tracks. But oftentimes those are the eastern cottontail rabbits. Apparently we can get snowshoe hares, but I have never seen them on the refuge. So they might be an occasional species in here. So that is rabbits. We will move then into deer. And I did show a little bit of deer tracks before. I think these are the tracks that people are the most familiar with, maybe squirrel tracks being a close second. Deer often walk or trot, and they kind of show that double register again. It just looks like one print moving through the snow. Sometimes there'll be a little bit of a double register where you can see both. They also have a galloping pattern, which is that 4-track pattern. You'll see kind of like a set of 4 tracks and then a space and then another set of 4 tracks. And you will oftentimes see if they're moving faster, they're in, say, really deep snow. You'll see these 2 circles behind the 2 toes that they have. Those are actually dew claws. They don't have claws on them per se, but they're kind of like hardened pad material, almost like, I don't know, almost like your dog's, maybe a little harder than that. But they sometimes show up depending on the snow depth and such. Let's see. Oh, so if you see deer tracks, it is going to be white-tailed deer here. I think it's been a really long time since anyone's ever seen moose tracks on the refuge. Again, you'd probably have to go quite a bit further north to see those. And in case you are curious, deer tracks can get anywhere up to like 3.5 inches long. Moose, it's more like 7 inches, and it's hard to imagine a track that huge sometimes. If you get a really young moose, you might confuse it with a deer, but around here on the refuge, you're gonna see white-tailed deer, and we have quite a few of them, and it's pretty cool to see their tracks around, because it can give you confidence then when you start moving on to some more difficult tracks. At least it does for me. So we'll move back into a few predators here. We are going to talk about the weasels. And we're talking like long-tailed and short-tailed weasels. American mink is another weasel, on up to the northern river otter. And these ones all have 5 toes per foot, back foot and front foot. There's oftentimes claw marks with these guys. They all have claws and they cannot retract them. Some of them have webbing, like the picture on the right there with the river otter tracks. You may or may not see the webbing. The cool thing with river otters is that they often slide in between running. So you'll kind of see these long like trough marks and be like, what on earth is that? They're just sliding as they run. I don't know if it saves energy or it's fun or both. I'm not sure, but they certainly seem to enjoy it. So the smaller weasels, on up to maybe the mink, often use like a 2x2 bounding pattern, where the tracks are just right next to each other as they move, and they just literally put their back prints right on where their front prints imprint. So they do that direct register as well. When you get up to like otters, they kind of use this 4-track type galloping, bounding type movement. And oftentimes they do drag their tails. They have really big, long, strong tails, and it is easier for them to drag them than it is to pick them up. Size-wise, if you're looking at a long-tailed weasel, you might get up to a 1/2 inch long. They're pretty small critters. They're still very fierce, and they are very capable predators. Mink are more like 1.75 inches long, and otters are definitely the largest at about 3 inches long, and they have really wide tracks too. So oftentimes they're almost wide or wider than they are tall, which can be a good indicator of what you're looking for. So the last group of animal tracks we'll talk about is kind of a mixed bag. The one I'll talk about first is the opossum. These guys are actually active in the winter. Minnesota winters can be kind of tough on them sometimes. It's really cool if you see tracks. I have not seen tracks yet, but their tracks, if you see the ones kind of the second to the left, they have very unique tracks. They have 5 toes per foot, front and back. The front foot's on the top, the back foot's on the bottom, and they often show claw marks. And they have this really unique, it's pretty much a thumb on their back foot, and they use that for climbing. And it's, I mean, sometimes it's at such an extreme angle. There's no other animal that really holds their toe at that angle. So if you see that, it's definitely an opossum. And they often move kind of in a walking pattern, similar to, I have the raccoon pattern here, although it's not quite right, but it's very close. If you look at in a book or something, you'll notice that like they have the front foot on one side, the back foot on the other, and then they alternate. So the back foot will be on the opposite side, and they kind of do that as they walk along. They walk obviously very similar to raccoons, whose tracks are on the right here. And they also show claws. Again, the back foot's on the bottom, the front foot's on the front, on the top there on the screen. And their feet, their front feet, it can look kind of, I don't know, sometimes it's kind of creepy to me because they look like really tiny hands. I mean, they get no more than like 2.5 inches long. So they're pretty little, and they look a lot like human hands, because sometimes those claw marks may not show up there. So if you see like a really, really tiny human hand, it's probably a raccoon. And then the other group I wanted to talk to just a little bit are birds, because we do have birds that survive here all winter long, and they do that just fine. We have a lot of ground birds, including, say, like dark-eyed juncos, which are kind of a dark ground-feeding bird. They're super cool. And they use this kind of 2x2 hopping pattern. Sometimes you'll see wing marks and stuff on the snow too. But most birds have 3 toes in the front and 1 toe in the back. Woodpeckers are one of the exceptions, depending on what you're looking at, although oftentimes they don't like to spend time on the ground. Crows might be another bird track that you might see out there. And they walk very much like people do, just 1 foot at a time, walking along. And their tracks can be on upwards of maybe 2 or 3 inches long, depending on the individual. So those are a few tracks you might see. We are now going to we're going to switch our brains a little bit over to being scat sleuths. And fair warning, there's a lot of pictures of animal scat on here, but it doesn't get any more graphic than the scat. So scat is just a fancy term for wildlife poop. Science likes to give it a separate term. I don't know, maybe it makes kids giggle a little less sometimes when you're talking about it. So what can Scat tell you? Scat can sometimes tell you the species you're looking at. It is not as reliable as tracks, but it can definitely tell you what the animal has been eating within the past few weeks, or I suppose it'd be the past couple days or so, depending on when you run into the Scat and the animal laid it. A little bit of vocabulary. There isn't as much vocabulary that I know of when it comes to Scat. I'm still kind of in the beginnings of learning more about Scat. Blunt is a term you might hear. That is kind of like just a flat edge, or sometimes it's just a little bit rounded. It can be a little bit rounded sometimes, especially with Scat. Tapered is kind of the opposite of that, and we have a really good example of that coming up when we get to some of our species informational slides. And that's just kind of like, if you think of almost like a cone shape, or like it's been pulled to a point, kind of. That's what tapered looks like. Contents, most people know that's just the stuff that's in the Scat, whether that's seeds, maybe insect parts, crayfish bits, things like that, depending on the animal that is eating. And then pellet I will use a little bit. It's more of like a rounded, maybe to like a jelly bean type shape. And animals often lay Scat down to mark their territories. So you may actually find Scat in prominent areas, such as on trails, maybe on a large log or a rock or something like that. It's just there so that other animals of the same species know, hey, someone lives here and they don't really want anyone else to live there either. So a few tips when it comes to observing Scat. Like I said, you maybe want to look at, just walk the trail that's on the refuge or near your house, maybe on a road or something. You may find Scat out there. Look on rocks, logs. If you see an area maybe where birds like to frequent, you might find a lot of their Scat below wherever they are perching. A word of caution when it comes to Scat. We all know that Scat contains a lot of germs. So I would recommend, if you were interested in looking into what is inside the Scat, maybe finding a couple sticks. So you can kind of poke it apart with the sticks, and then you can set the sticks off to the side on the trail. And they will decompose naturally like they were going to anyways. And then you might know a little bit more about what was in the Scat. You want to look at the size of the Scat, the shape. Obviously, the contents can be very important. I would even look for maybe nearby tracks or other evidence that might help you know what animal may or may not have left that. Again, if you're taking photos, I would use some sort of reference object in the picture, like a ruler or a hat or something like that, just so that when you're looking at the pictures again, you have an idea of scale. Otherwise, you really don't have any idea how big or small it is unless you wrote down measurements. Scat ID can be hard. Animals, their diets vary based on times of the year. They eat different things at different times of the year usually. Maybe they ate something they weren't supposed to, so it's going to look really different. Shape and color can also vary even within an individual of a species. So hopefully you can find some tracks or something nearby, or the Scat is pretty obvious as to what animal laid it down. As far as aids, I actually don't have any books yet. I did stumble across the northwoodsguides.com website. It looks like they have a really good Scat guide with each species on a different card with the description. If you go to that website, the cards I think are like $6 or something, but they actually do have descriptions without pictures right on the website. So if you're just looking for a general description of some Scat, that might help you out there. So now that we are beginning Scat sleuths, let's look at some animal Scat so you can kind of get an idea of what species may have left that Scat. So the first one we're going to talk about is coyote Scat, and that is on the upper left. Coyote Scat is actually kind of variable, especially in color. So it might be more of a white color, it might be more of a dark color, or maybe more like a lighter brown, like this picture is here. Now coyotes actually are a little bit omnivores, but they do eat more meat maybe than some of the other animals that are considered maybe more true omnivores. So usually you will see hair, maybe pieces of bones in the Scat. If you're looking in the fall, you might end up seeing some berry seeds or pieces of undigested fruit skins and stuff like that in it. And fox scat on the bottom here, this is kind of the definition of tapered. If you notice, the end of this scat here is tapered. Fox scat only gets to maybe about 2 inches. Coyote scat's more like 4 inches long. So there's a big size difference. And fox are a little more, they eat a little more fruits and vegetables than coyotes do. So in the wintertime, I think they tend to focus more on small mammals because that's usually the easiest food source to get at in the winter. But in the spring, summer, and fall, they're eating seeds, nuts, fruit, berries, that kind of thing. So you may find pieces of that in their scat as well. Bobcat scat definitely has blunt edges. That is on the upper right there. They're about the same size as coyote, on up to 4 inches. Sometimes you might find it covered up by leaf litter. Obviously, we know if you own a cat that they like to bury their scat. But oftentimes bobcats will actually leave it out in a prominent spot to mark their territory, and they might leave scratch marks. So they might scratch the ground, poop right on top of that, and then skedaddle on their merry way. So we'll move into some prey animals here and their scat. The first one I'm going to talk about is deer scat, and I think a lot of people have seen deer scat. It is pretty easy to ID. It's usually in these piles like this, and it's kind of like jelly bean shaped pellets. They're usually pretty dark, although the color can vary depending on what they're eating, and they're usually smooth. Sometimes these animals are eating so well of the vegetation that they might actually just be in clumps that kind of almost barely look like pellets, but you can kind of see the little bits in the clumps you find. Rabbit scat looks pretty similar to deer scat. It tends to have a rougher texture and is maybe a little more rounded than deer scat. And rabbits, unless they find a really good food source, usually do not deposit their scat in piles. They kind of just lay it singly or in a couple, kind of as they're moving along and foraging. Let's see. And so this is mouse scat. If you notice, kind of near, just a little bit past south of the tail on this mouse picture. I'm sure a lot of us know what mouse scat looks like. And most rodent scat looks pretty similar to that. It's kind of that long, much more oval shape. I'm not sure I would necessarily call it a pellet because it is a little longer than that. And obviously mice and vole scat is very, very small. Squirrel scat tends to be a little bit bigger, maybe more like, let's see what I have on my notes here, like a 1/4 inch long, which is pretty good size. But beavers can get up to like 1.25 inches, and that apparently you will see bits of bark and wood in that scat, which is kind of cool, but they still are kind of that elongated oval type shape. Okay, so we'll kind of move into the last few animal scats we have. So raccoons are definitely omnivores. They eat seeds, nuts, berries, fruit, shellfish like crayfish. They also will eat fish. Sometimes they scavenge off of carcasses too, so they kind of eat whatever they can find when they can find it. And their scat usually has blunt edges. It kind of looks like really dark brown or black logs, kind of in a group. Sometimes it can be in a little bit of a pile if they've been eating really well. And you can see in this picture, you can see bits of seeds. It looks like there might be a green berry in there that they didn't digest. So it definitely has a lot more seeds in it. And I've seen these anywhere upwards of maybe a couple of inches long for each log. Usually there's a few of varying sizes hanging out there. Mink scat, I have an example of mink scat here. When we talk about weasels, their scat is all pretty similar, minus the otters, and I'll explain that in a second. So the mink and the smaller weasels often have long, twisted, it almost looks like braided scat. This scat looks maybe a little less twisted and braided than some of them have. And sometimes they'll even fold over, so it kind of like a little folded bit of scat there. They usually contain like bones and fur. Long-tailed and short-tailed weasels usually eat other mammals, sometimes birds. And mink, you might see more fish and shellfish in there, just because they do enjoy water a little bit more than other animals do, so they do eat food there. Apparently otter scat has no distinct shape, but apparently it has lots of fish bones and scales. You might see pieces of shellfish, and it is almost always near water, maybe on a shoreline, somewhere near where they have been eating or hanging out. And I have heard it can have a pretty strong smell. Not that I would recommend getting your nose that close to animal scat, but maybe if there's a lot of it, you can smell it if the wind's blowing the right direction. And the last animal we'll talk about, I don't have a picture of the scat because these are opossums. And apparently their scat is so variable, it is really difficult to identify. I guess it can be different sizes, different shapes, different things. I mean, they eat basically like raccoons do, they eat a huge range of things. They can even be found sometimes eating, like if they break into your dog's kennel or something, they might eat the dog food. So they pretty much eat everything they can get a hold of. So it's very hard to ID. You pretty much have to use the process of elimination, no pun intended, to figure out that it might actually be a possum scat and not another animal. So we will move into another sign here, which is kind of a cool one. People usually like this when they see it: feathers and fur. You will oftentimes find fur maybe hooked on fences or sticks. Usually if an animal brushes up against something, especially in the springtime when they're shedding their winter coat, it will just come off on everything. So you can kind of look for it anywhere there. Feathers are oftentimes found on the ground. When birds preen, that's when they're cleaning their feathers. Sometimes they lose a feather or two. I know in the summer times we have a flock of turkeys that after a rain shower, they usually move into our backyard and preen. So we get turkey feathers all the time in our backyard, and they're really cool to see and really big. And birds actually do molt too. Sometimes they do them all at once or just parts of them. Usually it's just certain portions of their body molt at once so that they can still have the ability to fly and get away from predators. Feathers and fur can be really hard to ID. Scat might actually be easier to identify than feathers and fur, depending on the animal you're looking at. For example, birds have like 10 or 12 different types of feathers per bird, and they might all be different lengths and different patterns and different colors depending on the bird you were looking at. So it can be kind of tough, but when you're looking at fur and feathers, try to look at the color. If there's a pattern, that's really good to see. The texture, if you're looking at maybe a feather and you notice it has a really fringed edge to it, that's probably an owl feather, because owls need kind of a fringed edge to their feathers in order to obtain that silent flight that they need to catch their prey. And texture might be important with fur too. One cool thing about deer hair is that it's actually hollow, which helps it keep warm in the winter. I thought that was an interesting thing, but if you bend it, it will oftentimes stay pretty bent compared to other pieces of fur where if you bend it, it might pop right back to its original shape. Let's see. Oh, the Feather Atlas. That is a really good resource for feathers. They do have a search type feature on their site. So you can put in like the general length of the feather you found, the general pattern or color on it, and you might be able to find it. That atlas has like 600 different species of birds. So it may be kind of difficult. You could always put these pictures on iNaturalist and someone might be able to help you with it there. I did want to just mention owl pellets really quick. I know a lot of people might think that owl pellets are owl poop, but it is actually not. So when owls eat food, just like other birds, they have a crop where they digest the food or break it down, and any undigestible part, which is usually like fur and bones from the small mammals they've been eating, just gets compacted really tight in the crop, and then they cough it up. So if you find like a really, really tight packed ball of fur and you kind of poke it apart and you see little bones in it, it might actually be an owl pellet, especially if it's under a tree or a perching place. And I'm sure many of you, I know I have dissected several owl pellets as a child. And it's really cool to see because sometimes you can almost piece together the skeleton of the animal that it has eaten, which is really fun. Two quick notes about feathers before we move on to the next thing. Feathers can have some germs. So if you do handle a feather, you might want to think about washing your hands afterwards, just as a precaution. Feathers are really cool and it's really awesome to look at them up close. And the other thing that some of you might be aware of already, most birds in the United States are protected federally. And this includes not only can you not have the bird, but you can't have bird parts either, and that includes the feathers. And this might seem silly to someone who's walking along a trail and finds a feather, but it is to protect those birds. Unfortunately, when conservation officers find people in possession of feathers, they don't know if that person just found it on the side of a trail or actually poached a bird. So it's there to protect the birds. It might be a little frustrating, but it's best to take as many photos as you can of the feather, like this beautiful photo by Tina Shaw of the red-tailed hawk feather. And then just bring those photos home with you to remember seeing that feather. So our next cool thing, we are going to dive into animal abodes, animal homes. They are super cool. Some animals have really unique homes. And if you run into those homes, you could probably guarantee that the animal's living there, as long as that home is actually occupied at the time. I would look for maybe tracks and scat and other evidence near homes to see if those animals are actually active there. Or even like with this beaver lodge, you could look for fresh beaver chews on trees nearby. I know there's been a lot of beaver activity and the Oak Savannah Learning Center trails on the refuge lately. So some animals like beavers live in one home for many years, for a whole year, that kind of thing. Some animals use a different home every year, or even at different times of the year. If you're looking at songbirds, they build a new nest every year. They usually do not reuse their nests from year to year. Or like deer, they might bed down in different areas, depending on where they have been feeding or moving. Some homes are to raise young only, such as this bald eagle's nest. They only use that to raise their young, and once their young fledge or leave the nest, then they just go on their way. Coyotes also only use dens when they're raising young. Some of them have homes for adults and young, including beavers, and squirrels as well also have nests up in trees that the adults live in, and also the babies if they have babies that year. Some other homes include muskrat huts, mouse holes, bird's nest, already mentioned, squirrel nest. So there's some cool homes. There's even holes in trees that some birds nest or sleep in, depending on the time of the year. So the second to last piece of evidence we will talk about today is food. Now, and food can include a lot of different things. I mean, you can just think of all of the different kinds of food you eat in a given week, say. Animals eat a lot of different food too. Could be insects, could be leaves, nuts, acorns, that type of thing. Other animals, a lot of predators eat prey. Fish, maybe berries or twigs. It just depends on kind of what the animal is designed to eat. Some animals, which this is kind of on the rare end, I think, when it comes to animals, eat the same kind of food every year. So if you look at monarch caterpillars, they only eat milkweed. So if they happen to end up on a different kind of plant, they're not going to survive. They need to eat those milkweed leaves in order to grow up into a butterfly. But most animals eat different food depending on the time of the year. If you look at, say, fox is a really good example because they kind of target those small mammals mostly in the winter. They still eat the small mammals throughout the year, but when berries and nuts and seeds are available, they certainly take advantage of those when they can. It can be tough to narrow down what animal is eating what. You might only be able to narrow it down to, say, like the holes on this tree here. You can say, well, that was a woodpecker, but unless you see the woodpecker pecking on it, you may not know what species of woodpecker. You might see a squirrel bury an acorn. Well, then you know, yeah, definitely a squirrel left the acorn. But you might find a pile of acorns and all you can guess is, well, a squirrel might have left it, but it could have been another animal like a chipmunk or a mouse or something like that. So those are kind of some examples of food. The last piece of evidence we'll talk about is kind of I would call an immediate evidence. So if you hear a sound, you can oftentimes find the animal that's making it right then and there. It's not like tracks where the animals might be long gone by the time you come across those tracks in that area. So some sounds include calls such as singing and alarm calls from birds. Some animals might stomp their feet. You might hear splashing sounds when you're near water. Wings flapping make a really cool noise. Sometimes just birds flying overhead make really cool noises. They might break twigs, or a bug might buzz by your head or something like that. I always find it very soothing if I'm walking on a trail to kind of just pause and close my eyes and listen to the animals around me. Even in the winter time, although it's kind of considered a quieter time of the year, there's still a lot of hustle and bustle going on, especially if you run into a flock of chickadees. I'm sure we've all heard the chickadee-dee-dee call as we're walking through the woods or even in our own backyards. So obviously, just like birds, they have very unique calls, right? Once you hear a certain bird call, you know it is that kind of bird. Frogs also have very unique calls, but I won't talk too much about that because they're not active right now. And some of them make similar sounds. So like squirrels, sometimes if you hear a chittering in a tree, it might be a red squirrel, it might be a gray squirrel. It's hard to know unless you see the animal sometimes. Or like grasshoppers and crickets make very similar sounds to each other. So we went through several different pieces of evidence. Now it's kind of time to put it all together. So like I said, we were talking about sounds. Sometimes you can ID an animal immediately. You hear that chickadee-dee-dee and you know it's a chickadee. You might see a really clear deer track and you're like, yep, that is most definitely a deer. But sometimes you have to kind of sleuth your way through figuring out what kind of animal you whose signs you've stumbled across. So you might have to, maybe you found some really unclear tracks. You're like, well, I don't know what these are, but I'm going to follow them and see if I can find better tracks. And then you come across some scat, like the one in the picture here. You're like, oh, that is deer scat. And you know what? Those do look a lot like deer tracks. So then, yes, it is a white-tailed deer. I will say being Sherlock Holmes, especially when you start looking at animal evidence, can be kind of hard, and it does require quite a bit of patience, but it is very rewarding. I know I'm oftentimes asking myself lots of questions when I'm walking along, like, what was this animal doing? Why did the tracks disappear? Where is that fifth toe? This must not be the animal I think it is. So it's very cool to kind of increase that amount of wonder and curiosity into your life. I would say bringing kids with you too, if you have kids, that is a lot of fun because they notice a lot of things that oftentimes we don't as adults because we're a little bit taller than kids. So they see things a little bit differently, and you might run into more signs of animals if you bring a couple kids or a couple friends with you out on the trails. So with that, I think, Elena, if you'd like to move to questions, if we have any.
Yeah. We don't have any questions right off the bat. I will keep an eye out for it. Someone in the very beginning of the program, let me see if I can find her name. Emily commented in reference to the word scat. Just think about how many times growing up, or with kids, you use the word like, go scat. And just the different meaning it has in this context.
Yeah,
so that was pretty fitting.
It'd be interesting to know if like what the definition was, the first definition, if it was animal poop or if it was to get away from me. I don't know. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay, let's see. I think we may have a question. Not yet. Do you have any favorite tracks to find?
I have yet to see opossum tracks.
Okay.
And I tell you, I will completely flip out when I see them. It's cool to see really clear tracks of any animal for me. Because oftentimes you get these partial tracks or they're covered in snow. Yeah. I'm kind of partial to small mammals. And oftentimes along trails, you can see what I call mammal highways. There's this line of like tons of tracks going back and forth. And sometimes you can see the tail drag marks from the mice. It's super cute. And they oftentimes have like little holes in the snow that they go down in because they kind of hang out between that area between the snow and the ground, which is actually relatively warm, I have heard. That helps them keep their toes. So
the snow just provides an excellent insulating layer. I think that
Yes.
while I do not enjoy mice within my house, that's one of my favorite tracks to find outside just because since they're so light, they don't always register.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I love seeing them use that layer of snow, the subnivean layer from the ground to the top of the snow, and the
Mhm.
holes, and just imagining the tunnel system they have
I know,
down there.
and I learned just this year that red squirrels also make tunnels under the snow.
I
we
didn't
have
know that.
we have a red squirrel friend who keeps visiting our feeder, and we don't really want him on our feeders. So like one day I went out to scare him away, and he ran like 4 feet away and just went under a hole in the snow and appeared like over by our shed in the back of the yard. I'm like, what on earth? So I had to Google it, and of course apparently red squirrels, since they're so small, will oftentimes use snow tunnels, which I don't know, I never would have thought of a tree squirrel using a ground tunnel, but
No,
apparently they
that's
do.
news to me. Well, we do have a question, and I'll see if this stumps you. Otherwise, I'll jump in and I can help you. Heather asks, how many different types of birds call a refuge home? And it might actually be a question from Elliot.
Trying to remember what our list looked like. It's got to be somewhere around 100 birds or more. I want to say it's more than 100 because that doesn't sound like enough, especially with the migratory birds that stop.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting. I don't know the number of species of breeding birds on the refuge, but overall, our bird list, which includes those that migrate through and some that we see irregularly, I think we're right about at 267 species, but 100 might be closer to what breeds and sticks around on the refuge. And then that even kind of narrows down in the winter. We see some species come to us, come south to the refuge and central Minnesota for the winter, but we also see a lot become snowbirds and head farther south from us.
Yeah, it seemed like the cranes hung out for a long time, although we kind of had an early winter, so it was hard to judge if they stayed longer. I don't know. We had that snowfall, but then it was like warm and it was very weird. But
I think it was just mild and fluctuating enough for the cranes this fall.
yeah.
So another question from Elliot. Do you have a favorite part of the refuge to look for animal evidence? Hard question.
Well, it is because like on the Blue Hill Trail, we found bobcat tracks, which is super cool, right? On Monoman, I seem to keep running across animal kills on the trails in the winter. And we have no idea what caused them because there's usually tracks everywhere and it happens right on the trail. But I usually, my go-to place is the Oak Savannah Learning Center trails. They're short, there's a range of habitats. There's kind of like a wooded area, some open areas, and water. So that area is usually my go-to place. Although wherever I walk, I'm looking for tracks in the wintertime because it's too much fun. I can't resist it.
No, I mean, especially with fresh snow, it's the best time to see tracks. I mean, you just don't get that opportunity in the middle of the summer unless you have a really muddy or like open sandy area. So snow is awesome in that way.
Well, yeah, and in this fall when we got a bunch of snow, I actually saw a lot of duck and goose tracks, which was really cool because you normally don't see those in the snow. So it's kind of cool to see that webbed look to their feet.
Yeah, and we had some early snowfalls, I think, while they were still hanging around. So with that mid-October snowfall, yeah, they have such big feet too, especially the geese.
Yeah, I think some of the ones we saw were swan tracks because they were huge. I mean, those birds are so big, it's unbelievable.
So going along the tracks aspect, Margarita asks, how likely and in what area would we see black bears or their tracks on the refuge?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So one of the reasons I didn't mention black bear, we do have black bear on the refuge. But in the winter time, I'm sure a lot of you know they hibernate or sleep. So oftentimes you aren't going to really see those tracks in the snow. You may want to look at areas. The Oak Savannah Learning Center happens to have a trail called the Black Bear Loop. It has a ton of hazelnuts, so the bears kind of will go in that area to eat hazelnuts. You kind of want to go where the bears eat if you want to see bear tracks. So maybe if you know of a raspberry patch, or like a hazelnut patch or something like that. I know Ashley, our old intern, she saw some bear tracks, and I can't remember where she saw them on the refuge. She was doing crane counts, and she saw a couple bear tracks, and they are unmistakable. They are huge. They are very distinctly shaped. They have really long claws, especially on the front. So you will definitely know you were looking at bear tracks. But the odds of actually running into a bear on the refuge are really small. Black bears are actually really skittish, so if they hear people, they run the opposite way. But
yeah, I've always heard
question.
heard them referred to as kind of scaredy bears. That they they definitely can hear and see us and would like to prevent any confrontation.
Exactly.
And we're starting to see bears more often than maybe we would have 10, 20 years ago, just as the black bear range in Minnesota expands southward. So they're becoming a little more common, but it's definitely a treat to find signs of bear or to actually spot a black bear.
Yes, I have seen one black bear in real life. It ran through our backyard and was gone. But it looked like it might have been an adult male. He was pretty good size, but I mean, whatever happened there, I don't know if he got scared by the road, but he just kept booking it through everyone's backyards and he was gone. I didn't even have time to get anybody to come look at it because he was just there and gone.
No, some of those you just have to enjoy the moment.
Yes, exactly.
Here and there and gone.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we'll hang on for a couple more minutes. If you have any other questions, please pop them in the comments. Folks are saying they enjoyed the program and thanking you, Jenny, for sharing your knowledge of animal signs with us. And Ashley is actually tuning in as well, so shout out to her.
Well, I appreciate everyone watching. This is certainly one of my favorite topics, and I know we have a bunch of Facebook Live topics coming up that I'm pretty excited about too. So
yeah, you'll just have to keep the programming is kind of still in flux, so just keep an eye on the Friends Facebook page for upcoming programs. We'll primarily stick to this Thursday evening time frame, and we'll have some additional programming to hopefully brighten your winter evenings.
The good thing is it's almost the end of January, so we're over halfway through winter, right? As long as it doesn't go into April. Like it's done.
Well, we're at least gaining daylight. So I mean, you just gotta take what you can. Gaining daylight, every extra minute of sun is beautiful.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, we have a question from Sharon. She's curious if you have ever seen evidence of an owl land in snow to capture prey. She actually found that at her house, and that is, like she said, that is such a neat find.
It's kind of a breathtaking experience, and it's only happened to me once, and it was also in my backyard. Several years ago, we had some great horned owls in the area, and one day I was out kind of skiing the backyard, and boom, there it was. I mean, you see these big feather imprints, and you can see where their feet broke through the snow to try to grab that mammal that they were going after. They're kind of hard to find. The great horned owls aren't really in our area anymore. We have a lot of crows, and they are really good at keeping owls and other other predatory birds out of the way, so they don't eat any crow babies. But it's really, really a cool thing to see.
Yeah, no, that's a really fun sighting to spot.
Yes. Take pictures of that if you see it, because it's really, really cool. It's not necessarily unique, because owls hunt all the time in the winter, but for some reason where they hunt, it's just hard to find where they actually do that. So yeah, it's really cool.
Okay, and we'll take one last question, and this one, do you think it's likely that a wolf pack could establish itself within the refuge? It's a good question. And I can help you out too.
I know there are established wolf packs in Camp Ripley that is up near Little Falls. I wouldn't put it past them. Kind of the challenge for wolves is they actually really don't like being around people. So if we end up with more houses in the area, I'm not sure if their range will stop, because I know it has been expanding southward, just as the numbers of wolves grow and those packs grow. As far as I know, we've only had some wolves come in and leave. I don't know what the
Yeah,
likelihood is of them establishing a pack on the refuge. I feel like there might be enough land, but it wouldn't be a real big pack.
right. Yeah, as of now, we annually probably have a handful of confirmed wolf sightings on the refuge. A lot of it is that they're crossing a county road, or someone sees one or two wolves kind of trotting across a frozen wetland. And they either have a photo or those distinct characteristics that differentiate it from a coyote.
Yep.
But we don't have any evidence of dens or an established pack on the refuge. So they're just kind of moving through at this point. But that aspect about, the human component, I think could play a big factor, even if their range expands. The refuge is large, but people also use the refuge. So
yes.
It might not be enough for the wolves' liking. But we do have a healthy coyote and fox population on the refuge. So if you do see a larger canine, I would say it's much more likely to be a coyote, but it could be a wolf.
Yeah, and I know
always that chance.
Sometimes they can be kind of hard to tell apart. There are a lot of experts out there though. Like if you post a picture to iNaturalist or something like that,
Right.
they're really good at not just saying, oh, it's the coyote, but saying, here's the nose, here's the shape of the nose, here's the ears, the coloration, that kind of thing. So they are really good at that, because there's sometimes I see pictures and I'm like, boy, I'm really not sure, but they say it's, like Mankato or something. I can usually say, oh, that's probably not a wolf, because they really haven't gotten that far south yet that anybody's known. So location can often be a really good indicator of what you're looking at.
Yep. Okay, I think with that, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. If folks have additional questions that end up being in the comments, Jenny and I will answer them later, either tonight or in the coming days. So we thank you all for joining us and wish you a happy rest of your evening. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.